Hello, my name is Lee Humphreys, and welcome to Critical Perspectives on Open Science. I'm really excited about this panel to bring together such outstanding scholars from across critical communication studies to explore issues related to open science. So drawing on qualitative, feminist, design, historical, and community-based research, this panel explores alternative perspectives and approaches to conducting rigorous research beyond experimental and positivist paradigms. In particular, the panel examines how open communication must contend with issues of power, situated knowledge, historicity, contextuality, and fundamentally scientific legitimacy. And I think open science can benefit from some of the perspectives of critical and interpretive social sciences. So I want to thank everyone on the panel for being with us today, and for people who are other ICA members who are joining us online. So my particular talk today is really trying to think about what empirical qualitative research has to contribute to the so-called crisis of replicability. You know, within, I teach in a department which has both qualitative and quantitative communication researchers in it. And there's been a lot of discussion in our program about questions of replicability and the importance of open science initiatives. And I, for one, have always had a challenging time thinking about this crisis, in part because of what replicability means, or should I say doesn't mean, in qualitative and more interpretive social sciences. So I think what's probably a more apt term in interpretive work is this notion of transferability and of trustworthiness. And the goal of qualitative and interpretive social science has never been replicability. And so therefore, it is not a helpful criteria of whether or not something is true or not. And so I think what I want to suggest today are some alternative concepts for fundamentally, I think, dealing with, as much as it's a replicability crisis, it's really a legitimacy crisis in social science, and thinking in different ways about how it is we know what we know. So I want to introduce a couple of criteria or concepts from more qualitative methods of evaluating what is, evaluating research and what is considered to be important values and how in knowledge production. And so the first has to do with contextuality. And so it's this idea that all knowledge is contextual. It is developed in a particular time, in a particular place, by a particular group of actors. And that context is exceptionally important to both the precision of the kind of knowledge claims that are made, but also when and how we might think of it applying to different contexts. So the contextual nature of research is exceptionally important. And this is why this question of replicability really doesn't apply to qualitative work, because it's not a goal. The understanding here is that the social world is always changing. And so therefore, why would we expect findings to stay the same as well? As part of this, I think a second really important criteria to understanding what might be considered, good qualitative work is this idea of iteration. So qualitative work tends not to be a linear process of, in the hypodeductive way, but a much more iterative approach to data collection, data analysis, and ultimately theory production and creation. So I know in some of the open science initiatives, the idea of pre-registration is a really important practice towards enhancing transparency in the research process. And part of that has to do with this distinction between prediction and postdiction, and that statistically speaking, predictions are often a lot more meaningful because they're theoretically based than postdictions, that is, analyses which have been done sort of after having collected the data. However, in more iterative approaches to qualitative work, as Susan Douglas pointed out in her talk as well, right? This notion of iteration, of cyclical nature, of data collection, data analysis, theorizing, is an ongoing cyclical process. And so those distinctions between prediction and postdiction are not meaningful, and in fact very much suggest that in qualitative work, perhaps the postdiction is more important than the prediction, because it's often what you didn't think of and what you hadn't discovered until you actually started collecting data that becomes the real insight. And so I fear that with pre-registration and qualitative work, as much as people might say there is a kind of openness or flexibility with regard to pre-registration of qualitative work, that it really does not capture that iterative nature adequately. And the third criteria is transparency. And here it is methodological transparency, and it's transparency both with potential readers or reviewers of research, but it also actually has to do with transparency with participants. So you'll notice I said participants instead of research subjects. And it's because very often in qualitative work, we see participants as co-creators of knowledge with us. We are not there to necessarily extract some sort of data point from their head, or their memory or their mind. But moreover, it's through the research process, whether it be through conversation, interaction, participant observation, that we engage in a process of knowledge creation together. And I think that kind of transparency, both with participants as well as a transparency of method in our write-up, are really essential towards being able to evaluate qualitative research. The fourth criteria is credibility. This is often the qualitative term for validity. And this has to do with when you can't measure something against a standard, which is of course what validity is, then the question is, how do you know what you know? And how do you know, most importantly, that you're not misrepresenting or misinterpreting research? And so there are a number of steps that I'll talk about which help qualitative researchers ensure that they aren't wrong, and that what they're presenting or arguing is fundamentally the best and the most accurate that they can be in representing the experiences of very often the participants or the communities that they're working with. And then the last criteria has to do with transferability, and transferability is roughly the qualitative equivalent of a kind of external validity, or maybe a generalizability. But the question is, pretty much how do the findings in this particular contextual case, right, how do they apply beyond the specifics of this case? And part of the reason why transferability is really helpful is because it's an ongoing process. So very often generalizability, questions of it are addressed within the sampling process. And transferability has more to do with how the author writes up the details of their method, of their choices and methodological processes regarding recruitment, sampling, access, data collection, etc., data analysis, subsequent data collection, subsequent analysis, right, that iterative process, such that the reader can determine for him or herself whether or not the findings from this particular study might be transferable to another population, another time, another geolocation, etc. And so transferability really has to do with the kind of methodological detail that qualitative researchers should provide their readers to be able to assess how unique, how particular are these findings. Within qualitative research, there are a number of ways to enhance the trustworthiness of our research. The first has to do with prolonged engagement. The longer you work with a community, the more trust you build, the more likely you are to gain additional insights and perspectives into their experiences and ways of knowing. Multiple kinds of data collection. So qualitative work often uses this term triangulation, whereby we try to study a particular phenomenon through different kinds of methods. So it might be interviewing plus textual analyses plus participant observation. These are all ways of trying to triangulate a particularly complex or difficult phenomenon. And so one of the things that often gets one of the metaphors that often gets used in qualitative methods is this idea of a crystal, and that you can look at it from particular vantage points and sides, and you see different aspects of it. And that's what triangulation is trying to do, is trying to look at the particular phenomenon through different lenses and through different kinds of data. Additionally, it can be helpful to talk to different kinds of actors in a particular community or regarding a particular event or experience to be able to ascertain different kinds of perspectives on a particular social phenomenon. Another really helpful way of enhancing the trustworthiness or credibility of our research is through what we call member checks, where we take our interpretations back to the participants we worked with. And we said, this is what we came up with based on our theories and all of this. What do you think, right? Does this resonate with your experiences? Does this not resonate? What's captured, what's not? And that really both shows a kind of humbling nature of research, but also a commitment to making sure that our research represents the particular communities that who have given us their time and energy. And so member checks can be an important element to enhancing trustworthiness of it. But fundamentally, and probably most important, is that qualitative research can be enhanced through critical self-reflection. And this question of not necessarily how might I be right, but of course, more importantly, is how could I be wrong? And seeking out disconfirming information, seeking out, again, member checks, seeking out null cases, to identify the boundaries of our knowledge claims, but also to ensure that we have done the due diligence to really try to co-produce knowledge in these situations. So I think this kind of transparency and methodological reflection is something that qualitative scholars have been engaging in for a very long time, because we haven't been able to rely on statistical measures to demonstrate the significance of our research claims. And so I think a number of open science initiatives would do well to think more broadly about how it is that we enhance the trustworthiness and legitimacy of our communication research. And I think qualitative methods have a number of means through which we have been doing this for a very long time that might enhance open science initiatives. So with that, I will say thank you. This is a crazy time, and I really appreciate anyone who's still watching this, and to say to shoot me an email, to tweet at me. This is something that I'm really interested in, is open science and qualitative methods, and how they're not they don't necessarily have to be antithetical, but what are ways that we can learn from each other and ultimately do better, more just research. So thank you, and I hope you and your families are safe and well.